Very good.
All right. Well, thanks, Steve. Yeah, so that book club series, if you're interested in knowing more about it, go to jamesshore.com/s/AOAD2 book club. That's Art of Agile Development, second edition book club. And you can also find recordings on that page, and then that happens weekly. We've got just some amazing guests who've been on and are coming up. So what I'm going to be doing today is really meant to be a discussion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read some excerpts from the new edition of the Art of Agile Development. Unlike the one that Steve held up, this one has a goldfish on the cover, and that's how you know it's better. People ask me, what's different about the new version, and other than the goldfish, which you have to get just for the goldfish, it's actually been completely rewritten from the ground up. I wrote the first edition back in 2007. New edition, of course, just came out last year. So that's 14 years of learning and experience and advancement in the field going into that book. So it's basically all new, but still about how do you apply these Agile ideas for real in practice. It's very much a how-to guide with lots of concrete, how do we make this work? So what I thought I would do today is I'd read a series of excerpts. Steve told me that we've got lots and lots of time. So I'm going to read a series of excerpts and then use those as a jumping off point for us to just have a conversation about it. So if there's no comments or questions, I think I'll just dive into it. Anything to say, Steve?
No, good to go.
All right. So let me share my screen. Okay. So we'll start with the beginning. Chapter 1. Are you seeing this, Steve? It should say what is Agile on the screen. Okay. Chapter 1. What is Agile? Agile is everywhere and paradoxically nowhere. In the 20 years after the Agile freight train roared into software developers' consciousness, the number of companies calling themselves Agile increased by orders of magnitude. The number of teams actually taking an Agile approach to their work, not so much. Agile, the easily repeated name, is enormously successful. The ideas behind Agile, well, most of them are ignored. Let's fix that. Agile's genesis. In the 1990s, software development was believed to be in crisis. They actually called it that, the software crisis. Software projects were over budget, late, didn't meet requirements, and according to the oft-quoted and ominously named Chaos Report, nearly 1/3 of them were canceled outright. Agile wasn't a response to this crisis. Far from it. Agile was a response to the response. To bring software development under control, big organizations had created highly detailed processes that defined exactly how software was to be created. Everything was tightly controlled so that no mistakes could be made, in theory anyway. First, business analysts would interview stakeholders and document the system requirements. Next, software architects would read the requirements documents and create detailed design documents specifying every component of the system and how they related to one another. Then programmers would convert the design documents to code. In some organizations, this was considered low-skill work, just a mechanical translation exercise. Meanwhile, test leads would use the same documents to generate test plans, and when coding was done, armies of QA personnel would manually follow those test plans and report variances as defects. After each phase, everything would be carefully documented, reviewed, and signed off. These phase-based approaches came to be called waterfall development or phase gate development. If they sound like a ridiculous straw man, well, consider yourself fortunate. Not every company used a document-heavy phase-based process in the 90s, but it was widely recognized as a logical and sensible way to work. Of course, you needed to define requirements, then design, then implement, then test. Of course, you needed to document every phase. This was discipline. This was engineering. How else could you possibly succeed? Born out of crisis. Big companies define their processes in excruciating detail. Roles, responsibilities, document templates, modeling language, change control boards, every aspect of development was strictly defined and controlled. If a project didn't succeed, and according to the chaos report, less than 1/6 of them did, it was because the process needed more detail, more documents, more sign-offs. This resulted in a massive amount of documentation. Martin Fowler called it the almighty thud. This wasn't a great way to work. It was bureaucratic and dehumanizing. Skill didn't seem to matter as much as adherence to process. Programmers felt they were interchangeable cogs in an impersonal machine. It didn't even work all that well. So several people created simpler, slimmer, and less prescriptive methods for developing software. They were called lightweight methods, in contrast to the heavyweight methods used by big companies. These new methods had names like adaptive software development, Crystal, feature-driven development, dynamic systems development method, extreme programming, and Scrum. By the late 90s, these methods were attracting serious attention. Extreme programming, in particular, saw an explosion of grassroots interest among programmers. In 2001, 17 of the lightweight methodology proponents met at a ski resort in Utah to discuss unifying their efforts. The Agile Manifesto. I personally didn't expect this particular group of people to ever agree on anything substantive, Alistair Coburn said later. And in fact, after 2 days, they accomplished only 2 things: the name Agile and a statement of 4 values, see figure 1-1. During the following months, over email, they hashed out 12 accompanying principles, see figure 1-2. This was the Agile Manifesto. It changed the world. So, as Alistair went on to say, they did agree on something substantive after all. But there was no unified Agile method. There never has been and never will be. Agile is 3 things: the name, the values, and the principles. That's it. It's not something you can do. It's a philosophy, a way of thinking about software development. You can't use Agile or do Agile. You can only be Agile or not. If your teams embody the Agile philosophy, then they're Agile. If they don't, they're not. The essence of Agile. Martin Fowler has made a career out of turning complicated software topics into well-considered, even-handed explanations. His explanation of the essence of Agile software development is one of the best. Agile development is adaptive rather than predictive, people-oriented rather than process-oriented. Martin Fowler. Adaptive rather than predictive. Remember the chaos report, which said that only 1/6 of software projects were successful? It had a very specific definition of success. Success: the project is completed on time and on budget with all features and functions as originally specified. Challenge: the project is completed and operational, but over budget, over the time estimate, and offers fewer features and functions than originally specified. Impaired: the project is canceled at some point during the development cycle. These definitions illustrate the predictive mindset perfectly. They're all about conformance to plan. If you did what you said you were going to do, you were successful. If you didn't, you weren't. Easy. It makes sense at first, but look closer. There's something missing. As Ryan Nelson wrote in CIO magazine, projects that were found to meet all of the traditional criteria for success, time, budget, and specifications, may still be failures in the end because they fail to appeal to the intended users or because they ultimately fail to add much value to the business. Similarly, projects considered failures according to traditional IT metrics may wind up being successes because despite cost, time, or specification problems, the system is loved by its target audience or provided unexpected value. Agile teams define success as delivering value, not conforming to a plan. In fact, truly Agile teams actively look for opportunities to increase value by changing their plans. Look back at the manifesto. Take a moment to really study the Agile values and principles. How many relate to delivering valuable software and adapting to feedback? People-oriented rather than process-oriented. Heavyweight processes tried to prevent errors by carefully defining every aspect of software development. By putting the smarts in the process, individual skill became less important. In theory, you could apply the same process over and over with different people and get the same results. Come to think of it, they kind of did, just not the results they wanted. Agile says people are the most important factor in software development success, not just their skills, but all aspects of their humanity. How well team members work together, how many distractions they encounter, how safe they are to speak up, and whether they're motivated by their work. Agile teams have a process. Every team does, even if it's implicit, but the process is in service of the humans. not the other way around. And Agile teams are in charge of their own process. When they think of a better way of working, they change it. Look at the manifesto again. Which values and principles relate to putting people first? Why Agile won? In the first 10 years after the manifesto, Agile faced enormous criticism. It was undisciplined, critics said. It could never work. Another 10 years after that, the critics were silent. Agile was everywhere, at least in name. Heavyweight waterfall methods were effectively dead. Some younger programmers have trouble believing anybody ever could have worked that way. It's not that phase-based processes are inherently broken. They have their flaws, sure, but if you keep them slim and operate in a well-understood domain, waterfall-style methods can work. The problem was the heavyweight approaches big companies used. Ironically, the processes designed to prevent problems actually caused many of the problems organizations were seeing. It's very difficult to imagine how software will work before you actually use it, and it's even harder to think of absolutely everything your software needs to do. This is doubly true for people who aren't actively involved with software development. As a result, it's critically important to get working software in front of people as soon as possible. You need to get feedback about what's missing or wrong, then change your plans based on what you learn. As the manifesto says, working software is the primary measure of progress. Learning and responding to change are at the heart of what Agile is all about. Those heavyweight processes put so much emphasis on process controls and documentation and sign-offs, they incurred a huge amount of delay and overhead. They took years to produce working software, and they had nothing concrete to show until near the end. Instead of welcoming change, they actively worked to prevent change. They actually had a dedicated part of the process, the change control board, whose primary purpose was to say no to change requests. Or more accurately, yes, but it will cost you. All of this added up to projects that spent years in development before they had anything to show. When they did, it was too late and too expensive to make changes. They ultimately shipped software that didn't do what customers needed. A typical heavyweight failure. On February 3rd, 2005, Robert S. Mueller III, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, appeared before a Senate subcommittee to explain how the FBI had managed to waste $104.5 million. This couldn't have been a comfortable position to be in. In June 2001, the FBI had launched VCF, a project designed to replace the Bureau's case management software. 4 years later, it was canceled at a total cost of $170 million, $104.5 million of which was completely unrecoverable. The timeline for VCF tells an all too familiar story. The project launched in June 2001. 17 months later, in November 2002, solid requirements had been established. The software was delivered a year after that, in December 2003, but the FBI immediately discovered a number of deficiencies in VCF that made it unusable. The contractor building VCF agreed to fix the problems, but only at the cost of an additional $56 million and another year of development. Ultimately, the FBI declined to fix the problems, scrapping years of work. Although there are a variety of approaches to Agile, and some of them are more about co-opting a popular name than following the actual philosophy, one thing they all have in common is a focus on making progress visible and allowing stakeholders to make course corrections as they go. This seems like a small thing, but it's incredibly powerful. It's why we no longer hear about the software crisis. Software is still late. It's still over budget. But Agile teams show progress with working software, not documents, right from the beginning. And that's huge. There's more to Agile than just providing visibility, but this one thing, this was enough. It's why everybody wanted Agile. Why Agile works. Agile's first breakout success was extreme programming, XP, a method with the slogan, embrace change. XP mixed a healthy dose of philosophizing about software development with a pragmatic emphasis on making a difference. As the preface to the first XP book states, in short, XP promises to reduce project risk, improve responsiveness to business changes, improve productivity throughout the life of a system, and add fun to building software and teams, all at the same time. Really, quit laughing. Extreme Programming Explained, first edition by Kent Beck. Some people did laugh, but others tried it, and they found that, contrary to common wisdom about how software development was supposed to work, XP really did everything it promised. And so, despite the laughter, XP thrived, and Agile along with it. XP was the original poster child of Agile, donating a backbone of ideas and terminology that are still in use today. But the strength of the Agile community is that it has always been a big tent. Agile isn't limited to any one method. It's constantly expanding to include new people and ideas. Lean software development, Scrum, Kanban, Lean Startup, DevOps, and many, many more have all contributed to what people think of as Agile today. If you take their ideas and group them into categories, 5 core concepts appear. Rely on people. Build processes that understand and work with people's essential humanity. Put decisions in the hands of those who are most qualified to make those decisions. Base your work on healthy, collaborative relationships. Deliver value. Seek feedback, experiment, and adapt your plans. Focus on producing valuable results. Consider partially done work a cost, not a benefit. Deliver frequently. Eliminate waste. Work in small, reversible steps. Embrace the possibility of failure and design your plans to fail fast. Maximize work not done. Pursue throughput rather than efficiency. Seek technical excellence. Enable agility via technical quality. Design for what is known, not what is speculated. Start simple and add complexity only in response to actual needs. Create systems that are easy to evolve, even or especially in unanticipated directions. Improve your process. Experiment with new ideas. Tune and adapt what works. Never assume the established, popular way is the way that's best for you. Agile is defined by the manifesto, but the manifesto is just the starting point. Agile works because people make it work. They take Agile's ideas, adapt them to their situation, and never stop improving. Why Agile fails. Agile started as a grassroots movement. Its initial success was largely driven by programmers seeking better results and better quality of life. As that success grew, Agile's momentum shifted from the underlying ideas to hype. Rather than saying, let's get better results by adapting our plans and putting people first, organization leaders started saying, everybody's talking about Agile. Get me some Agile. The thing is, there's no Agile to go get. It's just a bunch of ideas. There are specific Agile approaches, such as extreme programming and Scrum, that will tell you how to be Agile, but you still have to be on board with the underlying philosophy. And for a lot of organizations, that underlying philosophy, adapting plans and putting people first, is really, really foreign. The cargo cults. Back in the 1940s, this story goes, American troops landed on a remote island. The residents of the island had never seen modern civilization before and were amazed by the men and materials Allied forces brought to the island. They watched the troops set up an airstrip in a tower, don headphones, and call great metal birds filled with valuable cargo down from the heavens. When the birds landed, shares of the cargo were distributed to all of the islanders, bringing prosperity and comfort. One day, the troops left, and the great metal birds stopped arriving. Missing their cargo, the islanders made their own airstrip out of woven bamboo. They constructed a tall platform, placed their chief on the platform, and had him don coconuts carved to look like headphones. But no matter how hard they tried, the great metal birds never returned. The tragedy of the cargo cult is its adherence to the superficial outward signs of some idea combined with ignorance of how that idea actually works. In the story, the islanders replicated all the elements of cargo drops, the airstrip, the tower, the headphones, but didn't understand the vast infrastructure that enabled airplanes to arrive. The same tragedy occurs with Agile. People want Agile's cargo, better results, more visibility, fewer business failures, but they don't understand the underlying philosophy and often wouldn't agree with it, even if they did. They want to buy Agile, but you can't buy an idea. What they can buy is the outward signs of Agile. Stand-up meetings, stories, tools, certifications. There's lots of stuff labeled Agile and plenty of people eager to sell it to you. It's often sold as enterprise grade, which is a way of saying, don't worry, you won't have to change. Uncomfortable ideas like adaptive planning and people-centric are ignored. And that's how you get a cargo cult. All the activity, none of the results. The Agile part is missing. At my old company, they wasted a huge number of man hours in meetings. Agile cost an entire team, 30 plus of people, their job as they produced nothing, almost nothing for almost a year. All Agile means is developers get shafted when the project changes, the day before delivery. Real comments about Agile from around the web. The name Agile is everywhere. The ideas of Agile aren't. It's become self-perpetuating. For many, the only Agile they know is cargo cult Agile. It's time to fix that. In the rest of this book, I'll show you how to apply Agile ideas for real. Keep an eye out for the cargo cult Agilists who have infiltrated the book. You can also find them in the index. They'll show you what not to do. Ready? Let's go.
Nice.
That is the introduction to the Art of Agile Development.
Very nice. Very nice. I like that. There's been some discussion in the chat as it came through. One of the quotes that I really liked about that is, Agile says, people are the most important factor in software development success, not just their skills, but all aspects of their humanity.
I loved that too when I heard it go by.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, where have you ever heard a sprint planning meeting or a retro talk about humanity? We talk about processes, tools, and deliverables. I've never really heard humanity. I'm scared, or you pissed me off, or humanity.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I'm lucky enough with my team. I think there's enough trust where we do get some of that, right? Where we've been working together a long time, and I think that it takes time. But we talk about how well, you know, how we're doing with other teams, how we're feeling, how it's more than just process for us in our retros. But you know, I think that's a hard place to get to. I've definitely not had that with every team.
What's interesting to me is that, you know, we often, even when we're hiring or building teams, it doesn't become sort of part of that discussion. Like if we really want to be agile, I know we can't be agile, but we can use agile processes and you know, why aren't we talking about how we hire and who we hire and how they fit in with the team, not just with skills, but, you know, does this person have courage to do what's right, to say what's right? Does this person have, you know, the ability to interact well with others in a way that maybe they, I don't know, you know, if can they learn? Can they grow? Can they help others grow and learn? And not just, you know, how many years of React experience do you have, or, you know, what was the last Java project that you did, and etc.
Like it, learn and grow.
Yeah, I think
And-
the soft. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
What got me triggered on the humanity thing is I was just in a cabal of Agile coaches for a group just before this, and somebody's side comment in the thing was, why don't people change? Why don't they do it the way we think we should do it? Why are they so stupid and we're so smart? I'm just so tired of hearing that. But it got off into a thread. Somebody said, when faced with a life-threatening situation, he'd come from a pharma.
Mm-hmm.
When faced with a life-threatening situation, only 15% of people actually change their behavior when given, and I've heard this before, a pretty high effectiveness thing. So that's what it's been bubbling in my head for about half an hour, that change is hard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, eat less, exercise more, you'll lose weight. Everybody knows that. Who does it? Stop stressing out and your heart won't die. I mean, there are some things that we know how to do, yet people don't do them. And that's not about cigarettes or food. It's about humanity.
Yeah, I just finished a book that I thought was really good. That the title was Immunity to Change. And so, like, there's a mindset I think that we all have that we're actually, we're, I don't know,
All of
there's a paradox that I hold in my head where it's like, hey, I want to do this, but I have this immunization is in a mindset that's stopping me from my actions. And so like, it's, as lay philosophers as we are, you have to wrestle with that. And I like James Shore's, like, you're really thinking about the whole person here. Like, it's not the keyboard time, it's the whole thing.
So
What are you doing differently, Paul, having read the book?
Mhm.
How did it change you?
The book Immunity to Change.
Yeah.
I think it allowed me to label that. It's actually one of the books that I think I'm going to suggest for my book club, because it actually has a lot more to it. And, just because I read some words, it doesn't actually change me.
Right.
And my experience has been that the only change is when I have to re-articulate them to somebody else to really like teach somebody. So that it's, a great book. I can label it, but I think there's more homework for me. So.
Thanks.
So I can remember back when I first was introduced to Agile and Scrum. I was just been hired into Solutions IQ in Seattle. I had come from the game industry where we had recipes for how to make games, 6 months versus 9-month games, and they were very waterfall, and it was managing a spreadsheet. And when I was introduced to it, I heard about and read the manifesto. There were some Agile trainers there. Schwaber even came and talked to us about it. And when I saw it, I immediately I was introduced to Scrum. And then I thought, oh, this is great. 2-week waterfalls. I can see the benefit to that. And to me now, that was around 2004-ish when I first was introduced to it. And nowadays, when I'm talking with people that have grown up with Agile and been working with Agile, and I ask, have you ever read the Agile Manifesto? They're like, no, what's that? And that to me gets to the root of it. Is absolutely, change is hard. Change is hard. When we're in stressful situations, we revert back to what's comfortable. And when people are getting their certifications and they're being introduced to it, they're being introduced to a process that is a cookie cutter, say, just do this. And they map what they know to that process and go.
That is so true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is so
That's
true.
not all bad. I mean, the cargo cult story is cute, and well, I'm sorry, it's instructive, but also just do what I do is how mammals learn. Whether it's get up at 6 o'clock and run for an hour, or sometimes, well, shu hari. Sometimes the shu is helpful for just do this and it'll happen.
Yeah, that's actually how the book is constructed, is to be, here's how you do it. Here's a cookbook to follow, even though we all know a cookbook is not actually correct. But I think what Steve was saying goes a little beyond that to when people come across something new, the habit, unless you're having it directly demonstrated to you, or you're working hard to avoid this, the habit is to map your experiences onto what you're learning, so that you're giving what you already do a new twist rather than doing something entirely new. And I certainly see that quite a bit.
Well, thanks for saying the word habit, because it is about changing habits.
Mm-hmm.
Waking up at 6 o'clock and putting on some shorts. That's a habit.
Yeah.
Rating test before turning it green is a habit.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I have a question. My name is Dimitris, I'm new here. So like, I'm following different people on Twitter, like Alan Holub, and he's like dissing Scrum and like also other stuff. But like, let's say, like you still need to have some process, right? So let's say, okay, we should not follow Scrum blindly, and I agree with this. But then the problem is, where do you start if you don't know what to do? Like, right, you need to have some process to work, right? So this is like what I'm struggling with. So like in my past, we were just doing Scrum, but I never really questioned, okay, why? Well, why are we doing this? But now, like after a few years, I started thinking about these things, and I'm like, okay, you should not do this blindly, but then what do you do? Do you just work on something and on a story, or how do you start? Like,
I think this sort of gets at what Michael was talking about. I'm glad you brought this up. I'm going to share my screen real quick. So I got a figure from later in the book that I want to
Go
share.
ahead, let me plug you, James. So the way you started is to buy the book.
Well, the book
Come
is
on, you missed
designed
the shot.
the book is designed to help you achieve mastery. And the way it works is this sort of shuhari type of approach. So you start out, you choose a method that's well documented. I've got one in my book. You can use Scrum, you can use extreme programming. And you follow it really carefully and do it thoughtfully. And the things that sound like a terrible idea, put even more emphasis on those, because those are the ones that are least familiar to you. And reflect on that, try it, see what happens, think about it. And the things that didn't work, do it even more by the book. Because again, in the beginning, you're trying to break those habits, and your tendency is going to be to map your existing understanding of the world onto the process. So the parts and these agile processes have all these interacting parts that sort of depend on each other. So if something isn't working at first, try doing it more rather than saying, don't do that. Ron Jeffries has a great article called "We Tried Baseball and It Didn't Work." And if you Google it, it's sort of about we want to try this baseball thing, but this didn't sound very much fun, so we're gonna move in the bases, and then we've got too many people. The bases are too close together, so we're gonna take a bunch of them out. And it's all basically how stuff gets corrupted by people not trying it as written. But once you've had some experience with it, and give it 6 months. Once you've had experience with the process, following it rigorously, there are going to be some parts that are not applicable to your situation, and they're not going to work as written. And that's when you're going to look at those results, and you're going to get down to the ha part of shuhari, or the journeyman stage. And you'll try and experiment with a change. And in my book, every practice says this is how you do the practice, and at the end it says this is some experiments you can try. Here's some things you can change. Here's what this is really about, and what to think about when you're making changes. So make a change and see what happens, and follow that change again thoughtfully and rigorously, and see what happens. And after you've done this for about 5-10 years, you'll get to the point where the processes don't matter at all. And this is the re part of shuhari, and you'll just do what feels right. And then you'll pay attention to what happens, and you'll do something different. And this is how things like FAST from Ron Quartel come about, because they're completely different than what's been written down before, but they're interesting ideas that actually work out when you try them. So is that helpful at all, Dimitri?
yes, really helpful. Thank you. I have a follow-up. So another thing I'm struggling with is that we talk about Agile in like mainly software development, but what about the rest of the organization? Like, how do you, can you, let's say, use the same principles in every department, let's say, or how would you go about structuring your organization to be Agile when you have more departments than like just engineering, for example?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't want to monopolize the conversation though, so let's see if somebody else wants to respond.
So I've got a wonderful example of that, is when, again, falling back to Solutions IQ, when I was there, they were an Agile organization. They called themselves an Agile organization. They had software, they had training that was very Agile. They did a lot of Agile training, and it was brought up in an all company meeting that, we call ourselves an Agile organization, but we've got finance, we've got HR, we've got all this other stuff that is in the company, and they're not Agile. And the owners of the company said, you know what, you're right. And they transformed the entire organization into an agile organization. HR, finance, sales were all run in agile formats. It was not easy to do in some ways, but it was a company that decided to try some experiments and ran with it. And it worked really well for them until they were bought by Accenture.
And
Yeah,
say
I
no
actually
more.
got a tour of SIQ once, and they toured us through the marketing department, and whoever's in marketing or sales gave a talk that sounded like they could be teaching a class. They were really doing it, and their board was really there.
I think, for these other parts, I mean, there's the idea, I think there's two parts to this. First is, if you're going to be truly agile in software development, that's not just programming. That's also product management. That's all aspects that feed into the product. But then there's also this idea of, well, what about HR? What about legal? And I think the practices mostly don't apply. But some of the scrummish practices, I think you could apply, but obviously the agile engineering practices, you'd want to, when you sort of, how do you do the day-to-day work of the department, that's going to change. But the underlying principles, what you find in the Agile Manifesto, especially in the principles page nobody ever clicks through to, I think those can apply to anybody.
Yeah, I think when we talk about the context, I think the cargo cult example that you have in your book is a great one. And it kind of shows like the infrastructure that's needed. If you don't have if you're not working with the infrastructure that's needed, you are pretty much, you're going to, like, no matter how much you follow this practice, you're going to be cargo culting, right? So I posted a little comment in there and people can read it. But really, like, so Agile works, but only in a situation where the business is following complementary adaptive processes. And I don't want to say agile processes, because right now, the way we've defined agile in this context of this is it's agile software development. And people, so the problem is they try and cookie cutter the agile into product management, right? And so, I mean, the primary, like, so what's great about the book is agile is about delivering valuable software. Valuable is the key word there, right? And the primary measure of progress is working software. But for product management, which is feeding, like, what is connecting, for them to do an adaptive work, we have to look at that statement for product management, for the adaptability, right? And product is about delivering customer value, right? And I think, and so what's the primary measure of progress for them are customer outcomes, which will indicate future value, right? And if you go up to the change of the business, there is an adaptive process for the business, right? Which is about delivering business value and how do they do that? And we don't want to get into those details, but unless those things, they have a different context, and we can't just apply agile techniques to them. Now, some of those techniques that shaped agile are the same techniques that would shape, like the same fundamentals are there, but it's not cookie cuttering agile software development onto them. It's using those same adaptive techniques in the context. I don't know if that makes sense.
Rick, would it be more appropriate to say it's not agile techniques, but it's applying agile philosophy to those areas?
Yeah, and I think our problem is, I mean, agile as an English word is very generic, but if you're, and that's why I try and shift to adaptive techniques, because people say agile software development. If you read James' book, right, he's talking about the practices within software development, and you can't just cargo cult those practices over to product management or to business management, but the fundamentals that make those work, right? If you actually apply those fundamentals about adaptive, about visibility of progress, about that kind of stuff, if you provide that level of visibility for the adaptive, what you're doing adaptively for product management, it's a whole other beast. So the people working in software have the context to have that conversation, right? So, I mean, Jeff Patton, and he has some good stuff on this, right? About outcomes, shifting to outcomes, right? And there's so many leaders that are talking about this. But really, even Marty Kagan, if you want to get into product management, has a great lens, right? But he has a beautiful lens on product management and how discovery, delivery, all those things work, right? And you can imagine an agile software delivery team, right, in heaven working in that context, because the adaptation makes sense. They understand what you're trying to accomplish. And they say, this is the right software to accomplish your goal. This is the right next piece, because I understand what you're trying to accomplish. That conversation is there. And without that adaptive context and the visibility back and forth, agility is going to struggle, right? Agility is going to be completely hobbled. So that's right.
I think
Anyways.
Yeah, I think it comes back to, I love Martin Fowler's essence of Agile, adaptive rather than predictive, and people-oriented rather than process-oriented.
Right.
I think a lot of this comes back to that. And I think when you're talking about applying Agile ideas to other aspects of the organization, although I wouldn't completely agree that there's a distinction between product management and Agile software development in the way you're describing it. But I think as you're applying these ideas to other aspects of the organization, it's really, if you focus on those two things, if you only remember two things, remember that, adaptive rather than predictive, people-oriented rather than process-oriented. And I think it works in any situation where you're talking about knowledge work, where people's minds are more important than their physical actions in terms of the results you see.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you. And the distinction it's a distinction in the practices you would apply. Like if I'm looking at the product management side of things, I would have different practices that I might have to layer in with my agility, right? That lens is slightly different. Now the overlap, like with empowered product teams, if you want to look up those words, the overlap, like the same team's doing the work, but they're just basically, when they're doing discovery and they shift their focus and they use different techniques to do the same kind of thing. And there's a lot of techniques, but it's how they deliver value, like you said, and those kind of things that really make the difference. So the distinction isn't there of like this team does this and this team does that, but the distinction is there on what value, what's the context of value we're discussing and what's the adaptation we're trying to make, right? So that's kind of what I don't know if I explained that well.
I wonder, Steve, if now would be a good time for us to move on to the next segment.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, I see Gregor just put his hand up. Let me let him get a word in.
Okay, thank you. I was just gonna ask a question. So I had the experience where agile and autonomy were in conflict with security standards, certificates, audits, who is responsible for data, and so on and so forth. I would be interested if anybody has a similar experience and tips how to proceed in such conflicts.
Security can be a challenge when you're talking about moving to an agile environment, an agile way of working. It's a big topic. I don't know if we have time to get into all the nuances today, but you see a similar thing when you're talking about process certification, like ISO 9001. Often these groups and these certifications and so forth, they have an idea in their head about how things must work, and you can't just do things a different way than they're expecting. But what you can do is say, well, setting aside the process you are expecting, what are the results and the outcomes that you're expecting to achieve? And can we work together to figure out an agile approach to achieving those same outcomes? For example, traceability can be a big requirement in a security environment. And if you're doing the agile engineering practices where you've got pair programming and frequent pair switching, you might have objection from your security folks about, well, we need to make sure that the person who is logged in at the computer is the one who is checking in the code. And so if you're pairing, you can't have the other person typing, which of course sort of defeats the purpose of pairing, let alone mob programming. So what you can do is say, well, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? You know, what security goal are you achieving here? And it comes out, well, we need to know who's doing the work, and we also need to make sure that we can trace back any change, and we need to make sure that the people who are working at the computer actually have the permission to work at that computer. And then there's a couple of things you can do there. For example, you can set up computers that are locked down that are not so sensitive, which is one approach I've seen. You can use, I think it was Jay Bazuzzi actually who tipped me off on this, but there's a Git keyword X authored by or something like that you could put in your commits that says it's machine readable, it's a standard, these are how we know who contributed to this commit. There are various ways of doing that would allow you to do these practices of pairing and mobbing. Or sometimes you say, well, we can't do that practice, so what are we going to do instead? And in the book, at least, every practice is accompanied by alternatives. If you can't do this or you don't want to do this, what are some other things that you could do instead? So that's sort of a very brief introduction, but getting into, I think, all the details of your situation, Gregor, would take a lot of time. Does that help?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, it helps.
Okay. So what I wanted to do next, should I go ahead, Steve?
Yep, go for it.
Yeah, what I wanted to do next is I have several more excerpts to share from the book that are going to each sort of direct the conversation in a new way. And Steve and I thought it would be fun to sort of go through that and allow the conversation to unfold after each one. So if there's no objection, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. And the structure of the book, it's in 4 parts. And the first part is, you know, how do you get started with Agile? And the remaining 3 parts are about 3 different zones in the Agile Fluency model. And I'm not going to go through the Agile Fluency model in depth if you're not familiar with it. But basically, the Agile Fluency model describes different ways Agile ideas tend to be put into practice. Teams tend to fall into different zones. And these zones are all compatible. So you can have a team that's in the focusing zone and the optimizing zone, or you can have a team that's in the delivering zone and the focusing zone, or just the focusing zone, or just the optimizing zone. But the the image I'm showing here on the right, this is the way that teams tend to develop their fluency over time. They tend to start out by learning how to be a fluent focusing team. And then from there, they often learn the need to focus more on technical capability and become a fluent delivering team, and so forth. So what I'm going to do is each of the remaining 3 parts of the book talks about one of these zones. I'm going to read the introduction to that zone, and then we can talk about what that involves. Part 2, focusing on value. You walk into work on a crisp October morning. Your last team was fully remote, but your current team prefers in-person work. Communication styles are very different, you muse to yourself, but Agile is much the same. Your team is a fluent focusing team. As a team, you're very good at understanding customer needs, coming up with good ideas, and focusing your work on the most valuable thing you can do. There's room for improvement, particularly around defects and deployment, and people have been talking about investing in delivering zone fluency to solve those problems, but management is very happy with your work. Some people on the team are advocating for your team to take full ownership as an optimizing team, but for now, your team's priorities are determined by Hannah, a product manager in the marketing department. She's pretty busy and her boss isn't willing to assign her to your team full-time. Speaking of product direction, today is demo day. Every week, your team releases a new version of its software, then makes a plan for the next week of development. Once per month, you gather together your major stakeholders, show what you've done, and get their feedback. You used to do it more often, but stakeholders couldn't be bothered to show up that frequently. So now you have less frequent, chunkier demos, and people are excited to see what's new. When you want faster feedback, you give private demos to interested individuals. Hannah leads the demo as usual. She originally wanted team members to run the demo, but you found that having Hannah in charge of the demo meant she paid more attention to what you were building. It led to better feedback and better results. Plus, she's much better at speaking stakeholders' language. Stakeholders seem happy with your progress this month. There's a lot of interest in the white label feature you're working on and the usual smattering of suggestions. Hannah makes note of them. After the demo, it's time for your weekly team retrospective. It's an opportunity for your team to look at your practices, team dynamics, and organizational roadblocks to experiment with possible improvements. Your monthly demo cadence was the result of one of those experiments. You rotate who facilitates the retrospective every week. This week, it's Shayna's turn. You're looking forward to it. Shayna always comes up with creative exercises to liven up the retrospective, and she's good about making sure the team follows through with an experiment to try. Your team takes a break after the retrospective, then Hannah begins your weekly planning session by pulling over your visual planning board. It's a large whiteboard with a bunch of index cards stuck to it with magnets. The cards form clusters, and each cluster has a name like resellers, actuaries, or accountants. They represent your customer groups. There's another large group of cards marked white label. We had some good ideas in the demo, Hannah says, but I want to stay focused on the white label feature for resellers. Everybody nods. You've been working on this for a few weeks, so it's no surprise. We're getting close to being done with the white labeling itself, so next up is the administrator screens. Before that, I'd like to set up a trial run with one of our major resellers. I'll send an email with the details. Hannah nods to Colton, the team's UX designer, and he speaks up. Hannah and I are going to be going over the trial run and white label administration later today. You're welcome to join. Afterwards, I'd like to work up a story map and do a planning game to flesh out the stories. It shouldn't be too complicated. I'll let you know when I'm ready to schedule it. Hannah grabs a handful of blue story cards from the white label section of the release board. We still have enough stories to get us through this week. Our capacity is still 12 points, right? Everyone nods. Great. Here's 3, 6, 8, 11, 12. These should get us pretty close to being able to trial with real customers. She holds up the first card, which says white label color scheme. Okay, for this one, we need to be able to change the site color scheme to match each reseller's colors. She briefly explains the remaining cards. There are a few clarifying questions, but you've all seen these before, so it goes quickly. Okay, that's the plan, Hannah concludes. Colton should be able to answer any questions about the details. I've got some emails to take care of, but I'll be over there, she points to a corner, until you're done with planning. Let me know if you need me to clarify anything. Hannah sits down and Shayna takes the lead. You decided a while ago, it was another retrospective experiment, that the person who led the retrospective would facilitate all team meetings for the week. You haven't heard of any other teams working this way, but for your team, having a predefined facilitator helps you stay on track, especially now that your coach has moved to a different team. Shayna spins the planning board around. On the back is your weekly plan. Okay, you know the drill, she says. She points at the 5 story cards Hannah chose. Go ahead and spread those out and start brainstorming tasks onto yellow cards. I'll prep the board. The team members gather around the table and start writing tasks on yellow index cards. As they do, they call out their ideas, which in turn inspires more ideas. Update the DB schema to include color scheme. Factor out CSS variables. Serve reseller-specific CSS file. Add reseller CSS file to top-level template. Before long, there's an orderly grid of cards showing everything the team needs to do this week. Shayna helps transfer it to the whiteboard. You've heard that other teams visualize their plans differently, but your team likes this approach. Let's do our stand-up, Shayna says. You gather around the whiteboard and have a brief discussion about what to work on first, then everybody grabs a task card off the board. The tasks take only a few hours each, so as each one is finished, you'll mark it done and get a new card from the board. Every day, you'll have another stand-up meeting around the board to review your progress and make sure the week is on track. I think that's it, says Shayna. The stand-up only took a few minutes, and the whole planning session has taken less than an hour. With the retrospective and demo, it's getting close to noon. Who's up for lunch? Welcome to the focusing zone. The focusing fluency zone is for teams who want to focus on what their company values most. They work closely with their business partners to understand priorities, provide visibility, and act on feedback. Specifically, teams that are fluent in focusing plan their work in terms of business value, not technical tasks, and align their work to their company's business priorities. Demonstrate progress at least once per month and do so in terms of business value, not technical tasks. Change direction to match changes in business priorities. Provide visibility into their progress so management can intervene when the team is building the wrong thing or isn't making progress. Regularly improve their work habits, reducing cost and improving effectiveness. collaborate well within their team, reducing misunderstandings and handoff delays within the team. To achieve these benefits, teams need to develop the following skills. Doing so requires the investments described in Chapter 4, Investing in Agility. The team responds to business needs. The team works with a business representative who provides the team with organizational perspective and expectations. Business stakeholders can rely on the team to work on whatever the team's business representative says is their most valuable priority. The team plans its work and shows progress in chunks that its business representative understands and values. The team's business representative sees and can change the team's direction at least monthly. Management enables the team to work at a pace that allows it to respond to business needs indefinitely. The team works effectively as a team. The team generates its own day-to-day tasks and plan based on the business representative's priorities. Team members consider their plan to be the team's work, not individuals' work. Team members share accountability for getting their plan done. Management considers the plan to be the team's work rather than assigning accountability to individuals. The team pursues team greatness. The team embraces and continuously improves a joint approach to its work. The team is aware of how intra-team relationships affect its ability to succeed and proactively attempts to improve them. The team is aware of how the work environment affects its ability to do work and proactively attempts to improve it. Achieving focusing fluency. The chapters in this part will help your team achieve fluency in focusing zone skills. They contain practices to help you work as a team, plan valuable releases, own and be accountable for your work, and steadily improve. Chapter 7, Teamwork, describes how to work effectively as a team. Chapter 8, Planning, describes how to plan and prioritize work according to business value. Chapter 9, Ownership, describes how to take ownership of your day-to-day process and plans. Chapter 10, Accountability, describes how to provide visibility into your work and gain stakeholders' trust. Chapter 11, Improvement, describes how to improve your team's work habits, relationships, and environment. So that is the focusing zone of fluency and the part 2 of the book. And so I'll turn it over to you to discuss. Focusing zone is really about the kinds of things you see from Scrum. It's about visibility, ownership, and working effectively as a team. And I'll turn it over to the rest of you to start the conversation about that.
Mm-hmm. Questions, thoughts, inspirations, ideas?
You know, I've noticed. Oh.
Go ahead.
I've noticed people sometimes learn about the Agile Fluency model and see the focusing zone and think that must be the zone for teams that are not very good. Like they have this really low level, their understanding of what focusing means is it's easy and it's not very important. And yet when I look around, I see lots of teams that are struggling to even get to this level. And I think it matters a lot. We should not dismiss it too quickly. Getting to focusing is really powerful. It takes a real investment, has real value with it, and we should take it seriously.
I 100% agree with that.
I'm going to kind of add on to that because I think that getting to focusing, you know, I put a quote that I really like: the management enables the team to work at a pace that allows it to respond to the business needs immediately or indefinitely, excuse me. That being able to not only learn to do this as a team, not just developers or, you know, like that sort of thing, but the whole team, the management side of it too, is a really big part of it. You know, we could be as agile as we want. We could move into this focusing area as a group of developers and you know, have all this information and knowledge and understand the processes that we're doing. But if the management, and I don't mean not even necessarily our direct manager, but maybe his manager or her manager also doesn't understand this, it impacts greatly on our ability to achieve and do what's necessary in a sustainable pace.
Another part of the focusing zone. So the focusing zone involves a couple of things that tend to be difficult, tend to be challenging for organizations. One of them is that we expect teamwork. This is, if you're looking at adaptiveness versus predictability and people-oriented versus process-oriented, teams that are fluent only in the focusing zone aren't necessarily adapting their plans all the time. They're really relying on their organization to define their plans for them. And so you might have a more predictive organization, but you still get a lot of benefits from being in the focusing zone, because this is where you're looking at that people-oriented rather than process-oriented. So it's all about having a team that works as a team. And this requires investments in HR. It requires thinking about teams as cross-functional whole teams that have the ability to solve all the problems they're asked to solve. And that's a fairly substantial investment and has fairly substantial benefits associated with it.
Mm-hmm. Where I'm currently coaching at, the members on the team are people associated working in a group under a common leader. They're not a team. When they get done with their work for, you know, their story, their task, they pick up another piece. They pick up another piece, and at the end of the iteration, it's like, well, I got my work done. And one of the things that we're evolving them into is, hey, when you get your work done, your whatever that bit of work is, stop and say, look at everyone else and say, what's the next highest priority and how can I help? And that's most likely helping one of your teammates. And that's growing them feeling more like they're a team.
I see so many so-called teams that are actually groups of one-person teams. Yep. Each person has their own individual responsibilities, their own tickets that are assigned to them. Don't get me started on Jira and other tools. They have their tickets that are assigned to them, and that is all they care about. And the company is organized like fluency. Fluency is unconscious competence. It's when your team as a whole can exhibit the skills that I talked about in the excerpt, and without having to like be told to do it or be coached into do it. There's actually multiple levels of maturity as you approach that fluency. First, just to give you an idea, first is we can do it when we have a coach telling us to do it. And then second is we can do it when we're really thinking about it. And then eventually you get to the point, well, we don't need any one person to tell us how to do it. And we just do it automatically. And that's what true fluency looks like. But fluency, more than anything else, is a reflection of the organization much more than it's a reflection of the people. It's about the system that the team is embedded in. And one of the things that prevents focusing fluency is a system that emphasizes individual responsibility and individual accountability, and individual and reward-based and blame-based culture that emphasizes individuals are either successful or failing, rather than teams are creating the results we want or not creating the results.
For example of that is that the same organization that has individuals under a common leader, they're component-based teams, they're not feature-based teams. And their biggest issue that they had for us coming in is visibility on things. So, yeah.
I have one question. I completely agree with this, like the team being as, let's say, the lowest unit in an organization. But what are your thoughts on like on rewards and performance? Like, because all the organizations I've been, they reward the performance of individuals. And I find it like when you're in a, let's say, an organization where they have team as a lowest unit, but the performance review is done based on individual performance, is a bit, creates some dissonance, right? Like, do you have some insights regarding this topic?
Yeah, I think this is one of the major investments that organizations have to make in becoming a fluent focus, to supporting fluent focusing teams. I actually have a chapter on this called, unsurprisingly, management, or a practice of management in here. But the underlying idea that the underlying investment people need to make and change, organizations need to make in changing mindsets, is that a successful agile organization is going to use theory Y versus theory X management. Theory X management, let me just find the quote so I can get this right. Theory X managers believe, I'll just read it. Theory X managers believe workers dislike work and try to avoid it. They have to be coerced and controlled. And extrinsic motivators such as pay, benefits, and other rewards are the primary mechanism for forcing employees to do what is needed. Under Theory X management, the design and implementation of extrinsic motivation schemes using tools such as measurement and rewards is central to good management. Theory Y managers believe workers enjoy work and are capable of self-direction. They seek responsibility and enjoy problem solving. Intrinsic motivators, such as the satisfaction of doing a good job, contributing to a group effort, and solving hard problems, are the primary drivers of employee behavior. Under Theory Y management, providing context and inspiration so workers can work without close supervision is central to good management. Agile is fundamentally a Theory Y approach, which means that if you're approaching it from the point of view of how are we going to reward people so they do the right thing, you are fundamentally misunderstanding how to manage in an Agile environment. Instead, what Agile managers need to do is they need to provide context, set direction, and provide coaching so that when people are having trouble, or make coaching available, so that when people are having trouble, despite wanting to succeed, that they have the skills they need.
Perhaps in support of that idea, I just wanted to offer a sort of my version, a concrete example. My particular places where I've worked have engaged with this, how to, like, how do you assess and like pay, you know, team-focused teams versus individual contributor-focused teams. And I've seen, you know, my experience has been all over the place, but I think where I am today, I think nests within what Jim just said. A lot of sort of, at least in the software development world, a lot of advancement models, professional development models are like, you can write bigger, more complex systems. You can, you know, you like the stuff you can do gets more advanced as you go up in level. And we sort of use that too. And I think there's a necessity to that. But also we add in, as you go up in experience, your effect on the team is a part of that. So, you know, we have 4 levels. Level 1, you're really figuring out your craft and how do I even do things. Level 2, you're getting to what we might call a senior developer type level, and you're becoming really good with your craft. And level 3, and this is not there aren't hard lines between these by any means. And then as you have more, you know, level 3 is where we really say, like, you're doing stuff to make the team better, in addition to your technical capabilities and whatever. So, and I won't even get into 4, but it's something like that where focusing the compensation models on those kinds of elements of a person's behavior, as well as assessing the team, like it's trying to assess the team more than the individuals, completely depends on the culture and the business culture and all the things where you are.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why this is organizational investment as much or even more than it is individual investment.
Thank you.
Do you want to say something, Michael?
You're on mute.
Alert.
Yeah, is this thread run its course? Because I was going to shift it. Anything else on this thread?
I was going to jump in on the same thread. Just
do it.
A book that I read, if I'm allowed to spout more, that helped me reevaluate myself a lot, is The 8th Habit from Stephen Covey, where he recognizes the industrial age thinking that we're applying to our knowledge age workers. And that's, you know, it echoes what the book, what you said, James, in that it's really, you know, it's a completely different worldview. And so if you're trying to bridge those without the conscious awareness, it comes out pretty backwards. And perhaps even my own naivety in Scrum and Agile in the early 2000s was that I didn't have the broader context.
Yeah, I like that.
Mhm.
Up on yours then, Paul, is that one of the things I dislike about coaches and the coaching community is that we say they're so stupid, they're doing it wrong. And I've been trying to find the positive deviance recently, not complain the negative ones. It's something I learned from Keith at Liberating Structures. Where are the ones that are doing this well? I was thinking, James, as you were writing this, it was kind of reminding me of like the Phoenix Project and all. But I wanted to be a smart ass and say, well, is this fiction or nonfiction? It's great you wrote a fiction book, James, but does this really ever happen? So I'll ask you, but I'll ask everybody else, where have you seen this kind of stuff that we're talking about really happen, even if it's in small places?
I
mean,
mean,
it's
absolutely, I've seen it
aspirational,
happen.
James, but I just want to make sure that it's true, not just fiction.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, the stories I'm telling in the book are composites. I'm not going to share any specific client, but they're absolutely true. But I'm gonna let the folks in the audience, the other folks, respond.
So I'll go ahead and speak up. Sorry, Shai, did you want to talk?
I mean, I don't have a great answer to the question, but I was just going to offer that I'm always trying to get to like living in a human, living in human society and operating in human groups and dealing with, I happen to deal with a for-profit business. It like, I'm still trying to get there, but I try to take a lot of the kinds of things that for example, are in the book and Fluency, all these ideas and plant seeds and help them grow where I am, which is sometimes easier because I'm in a small group, small team, small company. But I don't know that, like, I feel like I have relative successes, but not like absolute successes. So.
Well, and the thing I want to jump in there is like, if you're always doing self-improvement, you're never good enough, is the flip side of that. Like, are we trying to do something that's not doable and flagellating ourselves forever for something that can't be done?
Mm-hmm. So I know that I've, as a coach and as a full-time employee, been at places where there have been environments that are these, well, I fall back on XP teams, but these agile teams that are high functioning. Some places it's a bubble that forms, and then the rest of the company sort of doesn't want to change, and that bubble pops because those people go other places. I've been at other places where there's a sustained bubble. And I look back at those going, huh, that was a pretty good place. Maybe I should see if they're still around and go back there. So there are places that are there. I don't know of any whole organization that is there that is 100, 300 people that are doing it. I hope there are. I mean, there are places like, you hear about Menlo, you hear about Hunter, places like that. I've never worked there. I've never gone on the tours.
So I can say I worked at Pillar. Pillar worked this way every day. I felt that way. So I saw it there. I saw it happen. First time I've ever seen it. Really, I was at A-Flight for a while. Then Pillar really had it down. They were around for 25 years. They spoke to all the things in your book, and I actually saw it happen, and it was amazing. I was like, okay, this is how it exists. It's there. We're trying to teach other people to do it, which is the hard part, and that's where you get, it's tough. I don't know if we'll ever get other people like that. I don't know, because it depends how you're coaching, right? Are you embedded, or are you just trying to pepper stuff on top and hope they somehow through osmosis get it, right? So how we're coaching is one of the things that matters. I think that I was shown how to do TDD. I didn't know how to do it. I was hitting my head against the wall, 10 years ago, and I got lucky. Someone paired with me and showed me. If you don't have that kind of luck and help, good luck. I mean, unless you're really motivated and you're practicing 2 a.m. every morning trying to do TDD, good luck. We need to coach these people and be embedded. And that's how Pillar was able to share some of that stuff with other companies. And I think that's the only way we can get there. I think this scaling thing, you scale by showing people and mentoring them one team at a time. And that's how it spreads. So, we have this issue with the coaching right now where some coaches don't want to be embedded, some do. And I think that's a problem we have to solve too. We have our own problems. So
Everything in the book comes from my experience, with a few very minor exceptions. Some of the stuff that's newer, which I call out, and definitely the story that I'm telling here is based on real experiences on multiple teams. But the way I get there, my first experience was in 2000, trying XP for the first time. Actually tried it for the first time on a small team, and then tried it on a bigger team, and that's when I really got it. And we were doing all this stuff back in 2000, and after that ended, I wanted to take it elsewhere because I was completely spoiled. I did not want to work in any other way, and that was, nobody was doing it back in 2000. Everybody was talking about it. Nobody was doing it, and what I started doing is immersion coaching, which I think what you're calling embedded coaching, which is where I would join a team and I would say, let's do it for real, buy the book for 6 months. And that works. That really works, but you got to get the leadership on board. You got to get leadership permission. You got to get team permission. And I actually talk about all of this in the book, Investing in Change, Investing in Agility, talks about the changes that need to be made and how you do it. But the trick, I think, is to, if you've not done this before, if you can get somebody who has done before and just embed and do it all, again, buy the book at first, really trying it all, you'll have the most success. And then the companies that I did this immersion coaching with, it changed them long term. There was a company in Philadelphia that I did it, I don't know, 15 years ago. The people, that company is gone, or that team is long since gone, but the people who were on that team have gone off and formed more teams doing it this way. And they're actually running the local XP user group. And they've created this whole community of practitioners in Philly based on that original work we did. There's another company here in Oregon that it moved from their one software team to the entire IT department. So it does grow when it's successful, but there are challenges in terms of organizational antibodies and fear. And I think the bigger the organization, the more pressure is to pop that bubble than to see it grow. I think now might be a good time for us. I know we have lots of time. Steve told me at the beginning, sometimes you go for 3 hours, but I think maybe I'll go ahead and move on to the next zone of the fluency model. Again, these are not something you do in order. You can do focusing, or you can do delivering, or you can do both. But the sort of classic progression people go through is they start out with Scrum and then they learn the need to do XP, and that sort of takes you from focusing to delivering. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Part 3, delivering reliably. It's October again. Over the past year, see part 2, your team has been working hard at developing its delivering fluency, and now you're a well-oiled machine. You've never enjoyed your work more. The little annoyances and friction you associate with professional software development, broken builds, frustrating bug hunts, painstaking change analysis, have all melted away. Now you can start a task and have it in production a few hours later. Your only regret is that your team didn't pursue delivering fluency from the beginning. In retrospect, it would have been faster and easier, but people wanted to take it slow. Oh well, now you know. As you enter the team room, you see Valerie and Bo working together at a pairing station. They both like to come in early to beat rush hour traffic. Valerie sees you putting away your backpack and catches your attention. Are you available to pair this morning? She asks. She's never been one for chit chat. Bo and I have been working on the real-time updates, and he said you might have some ideas about how to test the networking code. You nod. Duncan and I spiked it yesterday and came up with something promising. Do you want to pair, or should the three of us mini-mob? You can pair with Valerie, Bo calls over, getting up and stretching. I need a break from networking code. He mock shudders. Even CSS is better than this. Valerie rolls her eyes and shakes her head. I'll let you get settled in, she says to you. I need more coffee. Half an hour later, you and Valerie are making good progress on the networking code. A steady series of soft chimes comes from the workstation. Every time you save your changes, a watch script runs your tests, then chimes a second later to indicate if the test passed or failed. You've gotten into a steady rhythm. At the moment, you're driving and Valerie is navigating. Okay, now let's make sure it throws an error when the message is empty, she says. You add a test. Dong. The test fails. Without a pause, you switch to the production code, add an if statement, and save. Ding, the test passes. Now when the message is corrupted, Valerie says, you add a line to the test. Dong, another if statement. Ding. Okay, I've got some notes about more edge cases, Valerie says, but I think we need to clean up those if statements first. If you factor out a validate message method, that should help. You nod, select the code, and hit the extract method keystroke. Ding, no problems. The sounds were the result of an experiment a few months ago. Despite the jokes about Pavlov's programmers, they were a hit. Your team works in such small steps that most of the time, the code does exactly what you expect it to. Your incremental test runs take less than a second, so the sounds act as instant feedback. You only need to look at the test runner when something goes wrong. The rest of the time, you stay in the zone, switching back and forth between tests, code, and refactoring with the steady chimes assuring you that you're on track and in control. Another half hour later, the networking changes are done. You stretch as Valerie pulls the latest code from the integration branch and runs the full test suite. A minute later, it's passed, and she runs the deployment script. Done, she says. Time for more coffee. Keep an eye on the deploy for me. You settle back in your chair and watch the deployment script run through its paces. It tests your code on a separate machine, then merges it into the shared integration branch. Everybody on the team merges their code from and to this branch every few hours. It keeps the team in sync and ensures merge conflicts are resolved early before they become a problem. Then the script deploys the code to a Canary production server. A few minutes later, the deploy is confirmed and the script tagged your repository with its success. You saunter back to the task board and mark the networking task green. All done, Bo, you call. Ready for some CSS? Welcome to the delivering zone. The delivering fluency zone is for teams who want to deliver software reliably. Team members develop their technical skills so that their software is low maintenance, easy to improve and deploy, and has very few bugs. Specifically, teams that are fluent at delivering release their latest work at minimal risk and cost whenever their business stakeholders desire. Discover and fix flaws in the production lifecycle early before they can do damage. Are able to provide useful forecasts. Have low defect rates, so they spend less time fixing bugs and more time building features. Create software with good internal quality, which makes changes cheaper and faster. Have high job satisfaction and morale, which improves retention and performance. To achieve these benefits, teams need to develop the following skills. Doing so requires the investments described in Chapter 4, Investing in Agility. The team responds to business needs. The team's code is production grade and the latest work is deployed to a production equivalent environment at least daily. The team's business representative may release the team's latest work at will. The team provides useful release forecasts to its business representative upon request. The team coordinates with its business stakeholders to develop in a way that allows its software to be maintained inexpensively and indefinitely. The team works effectively as a team. Developers consider code and similar artifacts to belong to the team, not individuals, and they share responsibility for changing and improving it. All day-to-day skills needed to design, develop, test, deploy, monitor, maintain, and so forth, the team's work are immediately accessible to the team. The team pursues technical excellence. When making changes, team members leave their software's internal quality a little better than they found it. The team actively responds to errors by improving the underlying system that made the error likely, reducing the probability of future errors. Deploying and releasing is automated and takes no more than 10 minutes of manual effort. No manual testing is required prior to deployment. Team members are aware of how their skills affect their ability to accomplish the team's goals and improve internal quality, and they proactively seek to improve those skills. Achieving delivering fluency. The practices in this book and this part of the book will help your team achieve fluency in delivering zone skills. For the most part, they center around simultaneous phases. Most teams, even agile teams, use a phase-based approach to development. They may work in iterations, but within each iteration, they follow a phase-based approach of requirements analysis, designing, coding, testing, and deploying, as shown in parts A and B of figure 3-1. Even teams using continuous flow tend to develop each story through a series of phases using a swim lane visualization to track progress. But Agile is inherently iterative and incremental. Each story is only a day or two of work. That's not enough time for high-quality phases. In practice, design and testing get shortchanged. Code quality degrades over time. Teams have trouble figuring out how to schedule necessary infrastructure work and design work, and they run out of time for testing and bug fixing. To prevent those problems, extreme programming introduced techniques to allow software development to be truly incremental. Rather than working in phases, XP teams work on all aspects of development incrementally and continuously, as shown in part C of figure 3-1. Despite being created in the 1990s, XP's testing, coding, and design practices remain state of the art. They yield the highest quality, most productive code I've ever seen. They've since been extended by the DevOps movement to support modern cloud-based deployment. Together with incremental planning and requirements analysis, these techniques allow teams to deliver high-quality software regularly and reliably. The practices in this part are based on XP. If you apply them thoughtfully and rigorously, you'll achieve delivering fluency. They're grouped into 5 chapters. Chapter 12 describes how to build software as a team. Chapter 13 describes how to incrementally build, test, and automate. Chapter 14 describes how to incrementally design code. Chapter 15 describes how to deploy software reliably and at will. Chapter 16 describes how to create software that does what it's supposed to. And that is the delivering zone of fluency.
All right. Thoughts, comments, ideas? I know there have been some good discussions going on in chat.
Yeah, I've been wanting to catch up on that.
This may be a little bit level abstract, one level more abstract than the stuff that you just read, Jim, and the sort of topics and chapters that go into it. I'm finding what seems to be the hardest challenge for getting into a delivering zone is essentially the trade-offs in scope and quality, but not necessarily external to the development team. It's that we want to do we want to do lots of stuff, like, and so I should preface this by saying we do not have like a strong product group, so there's a lot of ambiguity and flexibility and stuff going on there, and so there's always this process where we start to consider trade-offs in should we do should we handle do this or handling this way where it's a really good experience for the end user, or should we do it a slightly more bare bones way? and it's the dev team that's engaging with this topic. It's not like someone is telling us what to do in that, by and large. And so we feel pain because we want to get something out quickly, but we want it to be great. And you know, so there's other stuff in terms of infrastructure and DevOps and getting sort of verified quality, tested or confirmed. But the hardest part is, can we get, what can we do to get stuff out like this week versus 2 weeks from now or something like that as a development team? And that's the hardest thing, because we want to do great stuff. And it's just hard. Like it, and it's I think it's maybe a good problem to have in a sense, but I haven't. It feels a little bit like perennial and like unsolvable in a sense. Yeah.
Maybe just thought to that. So you were regarding about developing a feature, basically. But for this, I guess depends a lot on the context, right? If you're delivering something new, maybe it makes sense to get it out to get feedback faster, and then add the more eloquent, let's say, error handling. But if it's something that you already have feedback and you know you're gonna keep it, then maybe you do it properly, let's say from the beginning. So I guess you always have to decide on a case-to-case basis for such things.
Well, I think an important thing to keep in mind is that there is a distinction between external quality and internal quality. And lowering your expectations for external quality will allow you to release faster because you're decreasing scope. But lowering your expectation for internal quality will cause you to release slower, because you're going to you're going to introduce friction into your process and everything's going to slow down. So I would not shortchange air handling or testing, test-driven development specifically, in an effort to get things out the door quicker. But what I might do is I might only build the part that I want to get feedback on in order to get feedback on that more quickly. I'm not going to deliberately ignore exceptions, because going back and finding those places and fixing them later is really hard. But what I might do is I might have it just dump out to a log rather than having a really clean user experience around what to do when errors happen, and so forth.
I would like to jump into that. I think it's very important to be very radical in reducing scope like this, like getting rid of everything you actually don't need. And there are so many things you can get rid of that you just don't think about in the first place. Yeah, you really have to get radical on reducing stuff on the external side. And then I think it will be possible.
And that sort of conversation is at its best when you've got a really collaborative and functional relationship, high functioning relationship between your engineering and product focused people in the organization. And some people like Boss Pode really recommend that the product decisions be made within the team by the engineers. And I can see the attraction of that because and some organizations have a very high functioning relationship. A lot of organizations, a huge number of organizations, have a product engineering distrust. And I see a lot of dysfunction coming from that problem right there. And fixing that, I think, is a whole nother conversation, but I'll let Michael get a word in before I talk about that.
Healing the divide?
Yeah, healing the divide. You sound like you're quoting something, Steve.
Yeah. Sort of the background as to why Agile sort of came into play.
Yeah.
I'm going to shift my comment to my initial one about humanity and people, but
yeah. You know, it's funny. I think Cargo Cult Agile and Scrum's history of choosing terrible names have actually contributed to this problem rather than making it better. Because we hear about product owners, and I've met so many product owners who, and this is not meant to offend the good product owners and managers out there, but I've met so many product owners who ignore the product part and focus solely on the owner part, in that their job is to tell the team what to do, and they will talk to the business folks and own that relationship. It's like, no, you're supposed to have real expertise in understanding the product and have the authority and ability to make those trade-off decisions in collaboration with the team. But that's not what I see in practice. Unfortunately, it's one of those really common cargo culting of Agile ideas, is that we're actually going to have a project manager and we're going to rename them product owner, and their job is going to be to crack the whip on the team.
Before you mentioned the healing word, Steve, I had another thing, but healing is really a human thing. Shai, see if this just occurred to me as you were talking, and it was actually a question I wanted to ask Jay, but I think he's dropped. Listen in, James. Shai, could it be that you're focusing on delivery when you don't have the focusing? And my question to Jay, he said that they don't do that enough at some places. Like, what's the gap, and why don't people work on that? I mean, could it be, Shai, that you're focusing on the second phase before you get the first one done? Or done enough?
Yeah, maybe. Like, we're a small company, so it's 30 people and 8 to 10 devs depending on day. I don't know is the answer. Yeah, like, and
I mean,
and
if
not
your devs
everyone,
are saying we need to make it more quality inside instead of outside, they don't have some basic skill of being able to focus and move on.
It would, I think I don't have a great answer, and I think in some part that's because we are very responsive to, like, my suspicion is we go pretty fast, and we do 1 week iterations. We try to get stuff, whatever, done in a couple of weeks. We're doing, we have a couple of streams of focus, and I think we're just like, we want to get stuff out there, right? We want to get it out there so we can see how it does, but we also hold ourselves to making a great product for our users. And I don't really mean internal quality, I mean like the experience. And you can really, like, and we still work, we're still trying to improve our craft on the internal stuff, don't get me wrong. Sure. And there's a lot, there is pressure, right? It sometimes internally applied and sometimes externally expressed. And we operate in we're a team of people, so it's inherently a complex system. And sometimes people are like, and I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to caveat in a second. And sometimes we say, like, there's a lot of people talking about, we want to ship, this Friday if we can, it just gets really stressful. Here's my caveat. It is not stressful. Like, that is their experience. That is my experience sometimes. But I've been in other places where it is malicious and dysfunctional. And so it's just one of those human things where we're trying to hit all the trade-offs, and it's possible we're putting the cart before the horse. We're trying to do some things without some fundamentals in place.
Could I jump the cart horse thing? If people know about the game that comes with the fluency model, I was actually at Agile Open Northwest many years ago when Arlo was putting together that map of engineering fluencies, and that TDD is all the way on the right, and you've got to have this before you have this, before you have this, before you have this. it's kind of interesting to see how that chart became the structure of the game of you've got to do this before this. And that's kind of what I was thinking, Shai. It's like, if you don't have this, then don't try that. And one of the big things that came up for me is everybody wants TDD, but that chart asserts that TDD is the last thing you should do because it won't work until you get these other things figured out.
One thing I want to call out. So the work that Arlo did on the Agile Engineering Fluency, he asked Diana and I if he could use the term fluency. It's inspired by the Agile Fluency zones and the Agile Fluency model, but it's a very different way of looking at the world. He and I got together in Seattle back when he was working on Seattle and did some brainstorming together. That's part of what ended up feeding into this. So I know a fair amount about where it came from.
Well, your name's on the game.
Yeah, well, the game is based more on, I mean, Arlo and I created the Agile Fluency game, but the game is based more on the Agile Fluency model than it is on the Agile Engineering Fluency map. Thank you. And the games I still think is very cool. It's unfortunately, because of the pandemic, a lot of the stuff we were planning on doing with it sort of fell by the wayside. But with regards to the Agile Fluency model and the focusing and delivering zones, I do want to emphasize that the zones are independent. So you can pursue the delivering zone before pursuing the focusing zone. But that is a bit more difficult, I think, because the focusing zone is really where you really develop your teamwork. But I have to say, I've seen a lot of companies start with Scrum and then start to adapt to delivering. Arlo likes to start with delivering fluency when he's doing legacy code, or at least developing those legacy skills, or developing those delivering skills, if not necessarily reaching fluency. But personally, when I've seen great success, it's again been through that Agile immersion coaching, and I've only done that with XP, which is focusing and delivering together, and a bit of optimizing as well, but mostly focusing and delivering. And there's so much cross support between how the delivering zone practices help the focusing zone practices and how the focusing zone practices help the delivering zone practices. My strong recommendation is to try to do them both together if you can. But if you can't, then in some organizations, I think focusing on the delivering skills makes a lot of sense. The nice thing about delivering skills is they require less organizational investment because they feel like this is just something engineers can do off in a corner. Oh, we're going to learn TDD. Oh, we're going to get better at, we're going to do pairing. We're going to do mobbing. We're going to develop continuous delivery and so forth.
And cargo cult.
Yeah. And part of that divide between product and engineering comes from a lack of trust. And the way to heal that trust, I mean, it's a self-reinforcing loop in that a lack of trust will cause product owners to tell the engineers to not improve code quality, to just focus on delivering. And then not improving code quality will result in slower delivery and more bugs, which will decrease trust. So you get this nasty feedback loop when that happens. I have never seen, well, maybe not never, but I think it's quite rare for product owners and product strategy and product management to come and say, hey, we really need to break this feedback loop by improving code quality. But what you can do is you can start on the engineering side and say, we need to start being predictable. And the way to do that is to focus on technical debt and increasing our reliability. And that does over time break that feedback loop. So, so it can make sense to start with delivering before focusing because it's a smaller investment from an organizational change perspective, even though it's a bigger investment in terms of skills. I know that you said we could go beyond 12, and I think we probably will, Steve, if we stick to the plan that we had at the beginning. We can adapt, though. I'm agile.
We can adapt. I mean, if folks are willing and you have time, we can certainly do it.
I'm willing to keep on going. There's the final part that I wanted to share, and I think that could lead to some interesting discussions. Okay, I'm seeing at least one thumbs up. So
yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's do it. And for those of you who can't stick around longer, I believe there's going to be a recording put up by Steve at some point.
Yep.
Is that right, Steve?
Yep, I will. Within a couple days.
Excellent. And I'll link it on my website too, which is jamesshore.com. Okay, so let me share my screen again. Part 4, optimizing outcomes. October has rolled around again. Last year, your team achieved delivering fluency, see part 3. At the time, some team members wanted to push for optimizing fluency too, but management was skeptical. You couldn't get the support you needed. Since you've achieved delivering fluency, though, your team has been firing on all cylinders. Productivity went way up, defects way down. Hannah, your product manager, was having trouble keeping up. She delegated more and more responsibilities to the team, which rose to the challenge. It got noticed. Hannah was singing your praises to the marketing director, and your boss was talking you up to the engineering director. The time was right to push for optimizing fluency again. This time, it worked. Hannah was assigned to join your team full time. Not only that, she got permission to try the Agile experiment. The Agile experiment is what they're calling the way Hannah works with your team. Instead of having to go through a yearly planning exercise like the rest of marketing, she got permission to own your team's financials. She meets with her boss regularly to share statistics such as revenue and customer retention, and she's constantly trying out new ideas and experiments. Her colleagues are jealous. They still have to go through 6 weeks of budget and target setting hell every year. It's not just Hannah. The whole team is getting in on the action. Although Hannah is first among equals when it comes to product marketing expertise, other members of the team have developed their own areas of expertise. Shayna, in particular, loves visiting customer sites to see how people work. Shayna's just asked for the team's attention. I just finished a remote session with Magda, she says. You all remember Magda, right? Nods all around. Magda is a developer who works for one of your new customers. Her company is bigger than your normal customers, so they've been pretty demanding. Magda's company has been dealing with an increasingly complex tax situation, Shayna continues. They have remote employees in more and more countries all over the world, and dealing with the various taxes and employment law is overwhelming. Magda's heading up a team to automate some of that work, and she wanted to know how to integrate with our API. But it got me thinking. Shayna's voice rises in excitement. That isn't too far off from what we do already. What if we sold an add-on module for international employment? It's a lot of work, but we could start one country at a time. And Bo, you have some experience in this area, right? Bo nods thoughtfully. Hannah purses her lips. It's a big bet, she says, but it could have a huge payoff. This could crack open the market for more companies like Magda's. It would definitely widen our moat. None of our direct competitors have anything like that, and the big players charge 2 arms, a leg, and half your torso in professional services fees. Plus, we're a lot more user-friendly. She grins. It has a lot of teeth. We'd only need to charge an arm and a leg. What do the rest of you think? Your team engages in a rapid-fire discussion of the idea. As you come to the consensus that it's worth pursuing, Hannah nods sharply. I love it. We'll need to validate the market and figure out how to break it down into smaller bets. I'll put a story on next week's plan to come up with build, measure, learn experiments. We can start on them after we release our current increment. In the meantime, I'll do some research and run it by the boss. If the experiments work out, we'll need her approval to approve more funding and a change to our mission. Thanks, Shayna, she finishes. This is why I love being part of this team. Welcome to the optimizing zone. The optimizing zone is for teams who want to create more value. They take ownership of their product plans and budget so they can experiment, iterate, and learn. This allows them to produce software that leads their market. Specifically, teams who are fluent at optimizing deliver products that meet business objectives and market needs. Teams fluent in the other zones deliver what they're asked to deliver, which isn't necessarily the same. Include broad-based expertise that promotes optimal cost-value decisions. Understand where their products stand in the market and how they'll improve their position. Coordinate with leadership to cancel or pivot low-value products early. Learn from market feedback to anticipate customer needs and create new business opportunities. Make business decisions quickly and effectively. To achieve these benefits, teams need to develop the following skills. Doing so requires the investments described in Chapter 4, Investing in Agility. The team responds to business needs. The team describes its plans and progress in terms of business metric outcomes jointly identified with management. The team collaborates with internal and external stakeholders to determine when and how roadmaps will provide the best return on investment. The team works as a trusted, autonomous team. The team coordinates with management to understand and refine its role in achieving the organization's overall business strategy. Team members jointly take responsibility and accept accountability for achieving the business outcomes they identify. Management gives the team the resources and authority it needs to autonomously achieve its business outcomes. Management ensures that the team includes dedicated team members who have all the day-to-day skills the team needs to understand the market and achieve its business outcomes. The team pursues product greatness. The team engages with its customers and market to understand product needs and opportunities. The team creates hypotheses about business opportunities and conducts experiments to test them. The team plans and develops its work in a way that allows it to completely change plans without waste, given less than a month's notice. Achieving optimizing fluency. The investments needed for optimizing fluency challenge the preconceptions and established order of most companies. It requires giving up a lot of control and putting a lot of trust in the team. There's oversight, but it can still be scary. As a result, you'll usually need to demonstrate with success with focusing and delivering fluency for a few years before your company will give you the authority and autonomy needed for optimizing fluency. Early stage startups tend to be an exception, but everyone else will have some trust building to do. By the time you're ready for optimizing, your team is likely to have mastered the rest of the practices in this book. You won't need a how-to guide anymore. You'll have mastered the art. So the chapters in this part are short and sweet. They'll help you get started and provide clues about what to try next. It's up to you to take what you've learned about Agile development, combine it with these ideas, and create something great of your own. These chapters will help you get started. Chapter 17 discusses the nature of autonomous teams. Chapter 18 discusses ways your team can learn. And Chapter 19 wraps up with a look at what comes next. So that is the optimizing zone of fluency. Together, I think the focusing, delivering, and optimizing zones represent the promise of Agile. When they talk about what you can get from Agile and the business responsiveness you can provide, people are really talking about all three zones together. But in practice, I only see about 5% of the companies I talk to self-rate themselves as being fluent in this optimizing zone.
That higher or lower than you'd rate them?
Everybody rates themselves higher than I would. Fluency is a pretty high bar. It's unconscious competence. I think when people are self-rating, they self-rate in terms of what can we do when we stretch ourselves.
Right. It's sort of like the Tuckman model. When people self-rate themselves, they always say, well, we're always in performing. No, if you read the Tuckman model, they very rarely get to performing, nor even stay there. Mm-hmm. So did you ever see the Nordstrom Innovation Lab sunglasses video that came out in 2013?
I sure did, yeah.
Is that sort of what you're describing, that interaction that they have?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's been a long time. I saw it when it came out. So that's what, nearly 10 years. Yeah. But that to me sounded like a true optimizing, full Agile team with at least optimizing. I don't know about the focusing, delivering, but it sounded like it was definitely an optimizing team.
Mm-hmm. And it was a good video for a 2 to 4 day experiment, but they didn't do a lot of that.
Yeah. I have seen this optimizing zone in practice, but it is definitely harder to achieve. And it tends to happen after my work is done. So I'll help a team get to focusing and delivering fluency. And then over a couple of years, they'll build so much trust in the organization that, I mean, exactly the way I described it in the story, they start outpacing their product cohorts, compatriots, and they have enough trust that the product starts delegating more and working more closely with the team. I do always try to get a real product manager in the team from the beginning, and that's something I push really hard at, and that I think helps.
I was going to comment on Rick's comment in the chat about startups and the sort of optimizing phase. I have always only tried to work with smaller companies, so I've worked with a lot, that I think there's something about the size of the company. So because startups often are very small, I think that's why we often think of startups as possibly being in an optimizing mode. But I think any small company has the like distance of structural communication in the organization is so small that you get some of the components of optimizing. I'm not sure about like the let's call it informed courage of like you can get a lot of dysfunction in there too, depending on who the authorities are in the org, but that's true everywhere. So it does seem to be the communication distance is a key component of this optimizing fluency.
I would say that everything is easier, especially when you're talking about change in a small organization. But I wouldn't say that small organizations are more naturally inclined towards optimizing fluency. I think that the influence of personalities is more outsized in a small organization. And one I'm thinking of that did eventually get to optimizing fluency, their CFO had a huge influence over the company, and he had a lot of skepticism about IT in general. In fact, I was brought in as sort of a last resort before they got rid of IT and software development entirely and switched from building an in-house solution for running their entire business to getting something off the shelf. And that was one of the companies that took a couple of years to get to optimizing just because there wasn't the trust there. But what I do see is, I'm going to read what Rick wrote in the chat so it shows up on the video. Rick said, an early stage startup might start with optimizing fluency because they are primarily focused on experimenting and learning what needs to be done. And that's what I've seen as well as, how I've said these zones can be done in isolation or independently. And that's what I see with startups. They might actually start with optimizing fluency without having focusing or delivering fluency. Or they might have focusing sort of naturally. But ironically, what happens is as they get bigger, they start saying things like, well, we need to be a real company now. And they destroy the structures that give them the ability to have that optimizing fluency without even realizing that that's what they're doing.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on how a team of product managers might exist in a good agile company. If you look at like the LESS framework, they encourage very few product owners who are very empowered, and then you've got the other end of the spectrum, which is the cookie cutter product owner per team. And I think my company is trending toward the product owner per team, and I'm kind of curious what kind of advice do I want to offer here, because I don't think that we have like 13 products. I think we have 3 or 4 products, but we have about 13, 14 teams, and the organization thinks that having that kind of cookie cutter is right, and I'm not sure how to advise them exactly, but I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I got so many thoughts on this. So I've done scaling work for the last, I don't know, 5 to 7 years. I don't remember how long I've been doing this. And when I got started, I was doing horizontal scaling, which the best resource for horizontal scaling approach right now is team topologies. And it talks about, and I'm so jealous of this book because they describe exactly what I've been doing, only better and on paper. So, but this horizontal scaling approach is really about growing the number of people who can work on a single product by creating autonomous teams that have well-defined and minimal interactions between teams. And I was a big fan of this approach. This is what I did in all the organizations that I helped for quite a while. And the downside of this is that it tends to be a very rigid structure. As your business needs change, you need to adapt your teams to change with the business needs, and you need to adapt your architecture to change with your teams because of Conway's law. And that requires dedicated architectural attention to the structure of your organization, which even when I put that into place, didn't stick around long enough, because it's something you need 2 years after you define your teams, not the next month. It didn't stick around long enough for those changes to continue. The other downside of the horizontal approach is that XP can get up to about, in a cross-functional team, 12, 16 people. Scrum in a cross-functional team can get up to about 8 people, 6 to 8 people, and 3 to 5 is actually more common. And the problem is that when you have that size of team, it's really hard to be truly cross-functional. And with regards to the product owners, these cookie cutter product owners in particular, they tend to be people without a lot of authority, and they tend to be on teams that don't have a real clear business impact, because the business impact comes from all the teams working together. So after having done horizontal scaling for many years, I was starting to see the flaws in it, and I've really done a literal 90-degree turn to vertical scaling instead. Vertical scaling is when we're going to increase the number of people working on a product by allowing them to work as a single virtual team. And LESS is a classic example of that, which I don't have a lot of experience with. I've seen people who've done it, but none who have done it amazingly well. And FAST, which is Ron Cortell's fluid scaling technology, which I have tried, and it's brilliant. So I would say that in an organization that's willing to be on the cutting edge, I would use FAST with strong product management skills, not necessarily somebody with a product management title, but a few people with strong product management skills to direct the larger team in this single direction. And in a company that's less willing to be on the cutting edge, to use LESS, large scale Scrum. But I think I may be a little unfair to Boss Fode when I say this, and Craig Larman, but I think FAST is better than LESS. But I do not have enough experience with LESS to say that for a fact. But my experience with FAST was just so good.
Strangely enough, Ron just showed up and left really quickly while you're talking there.
That's hilarious. And the reason I like FAST is because it really allows, one of the problems you have when you've got these smaller teams is this cross-functionality question. FAST allows you to have, say, a couple of UX people on a team of 40 people who are always where they need to be, because because the structure of the teams is self-organized. And similarly, the product management can go where it's needed. The neat thing about a vertical approach is it does combine with a horizontal approach. So one of the companies I helped, they had 300 people in their product organization. They had 200 engineers. If we can have, and when you're doing horizontal scaling, there's a breakpoint around 5 to 10 teams where it gets much, much more difficult. It's easy to coordinate 5 teams or less. It's hard to coordinate more than 10 teams. So we had 42 teams when I was done helping them. And it worked well for a while. But if we had been able to use a vertical scaling approach, we could have made 5 40 engineer teams. And then you would have had the best of both worlds. You would have had big teams that could have really solved real business problems, and a small enough number of teams that you can still coordinate all the teams with sort of an ad hoc, people-driven approach, rather than all the structure you need when you're coordinating 20, 40 teams. You've pressed my buttons, Joel. So thank you for that question. I hope I answered it.
Well, it seemed like Ron went away, but he just turned his camera on and off. If he'd want to comment on some of that.
All right.
Oh, well.
You might have been
That's
pulled
fine.
away. So Ron certainly would like to comment, I'm guessing. Joel, do you want to reframe the question for him?
For Ron?
Yeah.
Sure. Hi, Ron.
Hey.
I want to run first certified FAST, whatever, coaches or proponents. I'm proud of that. Well, the question that I asked earlier of James is about the product management and how, just some thoughts on, whether to have one strong product manager that has the vision for the whole product, kind of the way that Les would suggest, or the other end is the kind of cookie cutter product owner per team, the way that the video I posted in here about misconceptions from Michael James would urge you to avoid the cookie cutter approach to product owner per team. And what James was saying is that potentially doing something where you're dynamically reteaming, you can have people kind of flow to the place where they are needed, which sounds like FAST would certainly support that. I'm kind of curious. I kind of think of FAST as it's the product managers who write down the cool stuff that they'd like to see get done on the marketplace for FAST. So in that context, I don't really see them as being all that involved with the teams, but I could have that wrong.
Yeah. It's actually, I wonder if I can find a graphic. Yes, they are. So a product manager in FAST is not going to be interested in story breakdown or writing stories. They're kind of more interested in the bigger picture.
Yep.
Yeah, so they're definitely not a product owner. So you're going to move off that kind of notion, the Scrum notion of a product owner.
I'm comfortable with that. It's been kind of flawed the entire time. So
it has. I think so too. Yeah. I think it solved a problem that it solved one problem, but it created another one, I think.
At least.
Yeah.
Well, I was just kind of keying off of when James said he pushes hard for having a real product manager on a team. That made me think, like, does that imply lots of product managers or a product manager who moves around a lot to be sure that they're present with all the people they ought to be?
Let me add a little color to that, Joel, because one of the things that people find surprising on a high functioning team that's both focusing and delivering fluency, so basically an XP team, is how much they get done, how quickly they can move. And I see very frequently that organizations underestimate the amount of work and attention that's required of their customer, of their on-site customers. So I actually recommend that there's a ratio, depending on the work being done, of about 2 to 3 on-site customers to engineers. And that's a product manager who's setting the product direction, that's subject matter expert who's answering day-to-day questions, and possibly a user experience designer who is helping define the look and feel of the application. One organization I worked with, they also had a technical writer who was part of that customer subgroup of the team.
From a more startup-y scale, which may not work for Joel for the kind of context you're talking about, I noticed that a set of contributors, devs, whatever they are, who get the vision of whatever the headline is for the thing they're working on, often they can proceed forward pretty well on their own. Yeah. But it's always the most interesting sort of either edge case. These questions pop up all the time, which you just need that touchstone of someone. So you don't necessarily need, like we're all physically in an office. The person, the product person who would get, or UX person or whatever, the subject matter expert, whoever that person is, would be over there. But in a virtual world, they're a Slack message away, hopefully. So hopefully that means that you could have lots of sort of product representation of it. The ratio could be, we could support a larger number of devs being helped by a smaller number of product focused folks. But obviously, YMMV, right? Like every org is sort of different in subtle and important ways.
I want to make sure I got a detail right there. James, were you saying that you think that a ratio of 2 to 3 on-site customers per engineer is about right?
No, 1 to 2 on-site customers per 3 engineers.
Oh, okay. I'm glad I asked.
Two, if you've got a complex problem domain, like this ratio comes from working with financial companies, and one of the companies was doing mass spectrometers and chemical analysis of a sample. I think fewer if you're doing sort of your bog standard, take stuff out of a database and put it in a web app type of stuff.
Okay. Interesting.
So we're approaching 2 hours, 15, 20 minutes. One more question, and then wrap this up if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah, and I have a final excerpt to read that I think will wrap things up nicely. So,
or we could go to the final excerpt. Oh, Jennifer.
Yes, hi, everyone. Thank you for, well, this is my first meetup with the group. I'm really glad to have found this group. And Jim, I don't laugh, but I've taken 2.5 pages of handwritten notes. So I'm finding the content to be very relevant and you know, quite interesting. So I'm learning a lot. Now I'm a relative newbie to the world of tech. My background is in Salesforce administration, and I'm dipping my toes in the water of coding and learning the basics of software development. So my question is really for the entire group. I'd love to know what resources you have for newbies in the world of tech, anything that would give me a great understanding of not only an overview of different coding languages, but free resources, books, you know, anything that can also give me an understanding of what path I might want to pursue in technology. So what role would that be, you know, a programmer, developer, business analyst, or stay in the lane of software administration? You know, I don't have a educational background in technology. I studied anthropology in college, so I'm doing a bit of a career change by leaving the world of sales and marketing and trying to get a little more behind the scenes here. So any resources that the group has would be extremely helpful, and I do plan on joining the Slack team and attending more of your meetups as well.
I'll let other people recommend resources, but I just want to say that I know so many people who have moved from other fields into software development as programmers even. In fact, my co-author on the first edition of this book was Shane Warden, and his degree is in music. So just want to say that this is a path a lot of people have followed, and I think it's one you can have a lot of success with.
I do not have a comp sci degree. I've got a biology and chemistry degrees. Some of the best programmers I've worked with have science or music degrees. So yeah, enjoy it.
And there's a thread in my head that I don't know, it needs a longer narrative, but I think we're missing the master apprentice relationship in this whole field altogether. And my hope for you might be to find somebody who's along further and then work with them on a regular basis. Like, you know, maybe there's somebody in this group that you match, and there's sort of a, you know, I think we could share a lot. A lot of us have been blessed to get where we've got to, and perhaps are ready to give back. And that might guide you, like that dialogue, I think would be very advantageous, because if we send you a list of 30 books to read, like, I don't know, it's not in the moment. It's not, you know, with a problem that you really have right now. So that was a thought that I had. Maybe through the Slack group, you can find somebody.
I appreciate that so much. You know, I'm on the self-taught path right now. I have not made the leap to joining a coding boot camp or a tech boot camp. And I know there are a lot of strong opinions about the merits of those, and also why to avoid them. And you know, and I am very much looking for a mentor. I've never had a mentor, and you know, I've always been a very independent person, but I have a growth mindset. I'm trying to take a holistic approach to my learning, and very eager to learn. So if anyone has a little extra time on their hands or is more willing to share to help me get acclimated, I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you.
I got to drop, but I did drop my contact information in there. Please reach out.
Thank you, I will.
Nice.
I did a lot of training for a while, and some of my best stories of 20 years of training are a yoga instructor and a receptionist who were crossing over into the. I'm welling up just like people who will step into a new career. I just, yay for you. Do it. It's I've got 20 years worth of a lot of techies that it was fun to share some stuff with them, but the ones that used it to transform their life, they're the stories I tell. So good for you. Grab my contact information. Let's connect.
Okay. I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up with a final excerpt. One final comment for you, Jennifer, is the Art of Agile Development, the book, is written for people who have experience in the field, but it is sort of an overview in a way, in that it talks about the whole sort of picture of software development and all the different types of skills and roles people can play in that field. And there are over 100 books in the bibliography. I think the recommendation for a mentor is absolutely your best one. But
individuals and interactions.
Yeah, yeah, but it's a place that might give you an idea of what are the options available to you. The only caveat I'd put on that is that it talks about a world that doesn't exist in a lot of organizations, unfortunately. So it might give you an idea of something that you won't see right away. And I do note that Paul just put a note in the chat too, so be sure to check that out. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and some final thoughts. Chapter 19, Into the Future. Agile teams never stop learning, experimenting, and improving. The practices in this book are only the starting point. Once you understand a practice, make it yours. Experiment with alternatives and seek out new ideas. As you become more fluent, deliberately break the rules and see what happens. You'll learn why the rules exist and what their limits are. What comes after that? That's for you to decide. Agile is always customized to the needs of the team. In the Agile Fluency model, Diana Larson and I identified a possible fourth zone, strengthening. If you look carefully, each zone represents a different expansion of the team's circle of control. Focusing gives the team ownership of its tasks. Delivering gives it ownership of its releases. Optimizing gives it ownership of its product. Strengthening continues this trend by expanding teams' ownership over organizational strategy. People don't just make decisions focused on their teams. They come together to make decisions affecting many teams. One example that's starting to enter the mainstream is team self-selection. In team self-selection, team members decide for themselves which team they'll be part of, rather than being assigned by management. Sound crazy? It's not. It's carefully structured, not a free-for-all. See Mamoli for details. I believe it's called, well, I don't remember off the top of my head. I've used team self-selection myself, and it's surprisingly effective. The results are better than I've seen from traditional manager-driven selection. It leads to teams that are highly productive out of the gate. The strengthening zone is about this sort of bottom-up decision-making. Governance approaches such as sociocracy and holacracy are experimenting in this space, as are companies such as Valve Software, Semco, and W.L. Gore and Associates. Yuta Eckstein and John Buck's book, Company-Wide Agility with Beyond Budgeting, Open Space, and Sociocracy, goes into more detail. For a lighter weight introduction to the philosophy, see Ricardo Semler's Maverick. It's a fascinating account of the author's revitalization of his company's management approach. That said, the Agile Fluency model has never been a maturity model. You're not required to pass through the zones in order or to achieve fluency in every zone. Although individual practices such as team self-selection have their place, I suspect full strengthening fluency is inappropriate for most companies. But if you want to live on the cutting edge and join the ranks of the innovators who made Agile what it is today, the strengthening zone is one place to start. Beyond that, who knows? There are additional zones waiting to be discovered. Ultimately, though, Agile doesn't matter. Really. What matters is success for your team members, organization, and stakeholders in whatever way they define it. Agile practices, principles, and ideas are merely guides along the way. Start by following the practices rigorously. Learn how to apply the principles and key ideas. Break the rules, experiment, see what works, and learn some more. Share your insights and passion and learn even more. Over time, with discipline and experience, the practices and principles will become less important. When doing the right thing is a matter of instinct and intuition, finely honed by experience, it's time to leave rules and principles behind. It won't matter what you call it. When your intuition leads to great software that serves a valuable purpose and your wisdom inspires the next generation of teams, you have mastered the art of agile development.
Nice.
And that is the end of the book, sort of a tour of the whole thing. So in